Welcome to Being in Practice.
I'm Erin Davis. I use they, them pronouns. I'm a therapist.
I'm Dani Dwyer-Willingham. I use they, she pronouns, and I'm a quantum somatic coach. And we're a couple of queer, neurodivergent, multi-passionates here to get curious and unpack elements of collective and individual experiences through our intuitive, trauma-informed lenses.
We're both practitioners and people in our own constant discovery, here to provide education, entertainment, and an exploration on the practice of being, as messy and as multidimensional as it can be.
Let's be in practice together.
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Welcome back. We're excited to have you.
Welcome back to Being in Practice. How is everybody doing?
Are you asking me?
How are you doing, Erin?
I'm good.
Amazing.
I'm feeling a little tired, but I'm excited to be talking about
what we're talking about
with you today.
Glad we're being honest. Y'all, that's all we're going to be on here, is honest about how we're feeling, what we're going through. Yep.
I had some chicken pot pie. It made me sleepy.
What can we say? Okay. If you're new here, thank you for joining us. I'm Dani, my co-host Erin.
Hey.
Welcome. Last week, we talked about healing from repression into authenticity, which is the perfect building block for what we're going to be talking about today, which is relationships. So if you haven't listened to last week, highly recommend. But also, if you're joining us here for the first time and want to keep listening, welcome.
And you'll be fine.
And you'll be great. Yeah, we will take care of you. This is a tender, care-centered space.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we explain ourselves well, I think. So, yeah, specifically, we're getting into reciprocal relationships, which is the reciprocal part of this episode. You interjected, I would say. I don't disagree with it. I'm just saying.
Yeah. So we're talking.
I'm kind of curious what reciprocal relationships mean.
Let's talk all about it. Thanks for being curious.
Because, I mean, I could guess based on, like, my, an educated guess.
Your therapy brain?
Yeah, my therapy brain. Like, I don't even know all the details of everything, but it would be great for you to maybe define that.
Absolutely. So, for where I'm at in my journey with relationships, I have, again, as we talked about last time, healed and am constantly healing from repression into authenticity in the understanding of the kind and the quality of relationships that I want to have in my life. They are founded in reciprocity. Reciprocity for me, coming out of a relationship with power dynamics and power over dynamics, means a level playing field in the sense that there is equality, equanimity, equal and intentional energy exchange. I think also in partnerships, in friendships, in familial relationships, for them to have the kind of reciprocity that, like, I value at this time in my life. There's an acknowledgement that relationships will ebb and flow. Sometimes one person will need more and the other person will need to be more of a supportive role. And then that supportive person will oppositely, or like at other times, need more, and then that other person comes in and kind of offers more supportive role. And then there will be some times where, like, there's more of a balance and everyone's giving and receiving kind of as you go. But I think, again, for me, like, healing out of power over dynamics and coming into this space of truly valuing reciprocity in my relationships and realizing that those are the only kind of relationships that are in value alignment for me at this time in my life.
That's a great definition. And I'm glad you put the ebb and flow part, because when I hear equality, which is a word you use to describe reciprocal relationships or how they function, I go to well, it's not always going to be exactly even, but you address to that. So
yes,
that makes sense. And I love it. And I think that's definitely what I strive for in my relationships, even though I wouldn't necessarily use that word, or haven't yet used that word to say that that's what I'm looking for. I like it. It's just being a little bit more intentional with language, which is something I care a lot about. So you kind of talked about power over dynamics. So maybe it would be helpful, and I think it would be helpful for my brain to know what the opposite, like, if people aren't striving for reciprocal relationships, is it that maybe we're not striving for any specific kind of, maybe we don't have intention around it, maybe we're not aware, or maybe we're unconscious, or maybe like we've just found ourselves in what other types of, I mean, power over, abusive. I mean, those are words I think of like other forms of engaging. But I feel like there has to be some like neutral ground where maybe you're in a connection with someone and maybe it's not toxic, all these words, buzzwords we could use or real words we could use, but maybe it's just like neutral. Like I feel like I've had experiences in my life where, even in my adult life, where I've had, it's just like kind of flat. Maybe it's I'm like giving more than I'm getting, or vice versa, but it's not like harmful or like power dynamic-y.
I mean, I think that's a super personal question to ask for our listeners too. If you feel like there's a relationship, as you described it, as flat and neutral, but without power dynamics, is that a relationship that for you feels fulfilling and value aligned? If you are giving more energy than you are receiving, does that feel sustainable for you? If you are kind of out of what would feel like a reciprocal flow, does it feel like that's a relationship that adds value to your life? Do you feel like it drains your energy? I think, again, those are kind of questions that we can all ask ourselves about individual relationships, about group dynamics. Yeah. I think not every relationship is going to be equal at all. Like, especially the way that, humans connect in so many different ways, which is something we're going to talk so much about in today's episode. But yeah, like, what does it give to you? What do you give to it? Does that feel valuable to you? I think there's so many ways to examine and to get value from relationships. It just is so personal to like what adds to your life.
Definitely. And I think, so those are good questions maybe for our listeners, for myself, for all of us to ask about maybe more neutral or less harmful like relationship dynamics. But they do exist. I think that's what I was getting at, right? Like there's the whole spectrum of like connection of, so if reciprocal is the ideal and maybe abusive or otherwise toxic or harmful is like the other side of the spectrum. There is also this middle ground of like where it gets a little grayer, like where maybe in even some of these gray ones, like we were talking about a minute ago before we started recording, that we do like sometimes neutral connections, flat connections are necessary and or beneficial to our lives.
For sure.
And those are good questions to ask about those gray relationships for yourself if you're wondering.
Definitely. I think this is there's two things I want to say, is that sometimes getting to a neutral place in a relationship is like the absolute best you can do. For instance, family of origin, sometimes those are tougher dynamics. Sometimes you're healing from toxic or more codependent or more dysfunctional dynamics. Healing into neutrality, big win on that. For myself as a co-parent, as someone who's divorced and parenting a child with a co-parent, neutrality, big win. Like we had a compassionate and as conscious as possible divorce. And, there were still things that were really tough. So for us to have like what is now a very neutral and unemotionally charged co-parenting relationship, again, excellent,
ideal,
like great space to be. So for me, that is I don't need a reciprocal relationship in those kinds of ways. It's like they can be in my life, they can serve me in those ways. Neutrality is like optimum for those.
Well, that's good perspective because even if your ideal, which you were just kind of talking about at the beginning, is reciprocal, clearly that's the ideal for like maybe your most intimate connection.
For sure.
But then we have these other layers of like, right, what's closest to my core as far as who I'm connected with. And the farther you go out, maybe the more acceptable it is to be neutral. And like that's what you're describing. And also, as you're saying, right, like family of origin, ex-partner who you're co-parenting with, like we're talking about relationships today of all sorts. And so that brings
scopes of relationships. I do want to kind of start by just bringing in this definition of love that Bell Hooks kind of introduced to the world through her book, All About Love, New Visions, that I believe was first Scott Peck's definition. And for me, relationships, even the neutral ones, I would strive to influence that everyone examine if our relationships contain these kind of layers of this definition. So this definition of love, they're the quote unquote 7 components, in which love includes care, affection, recognition, respect, commitment, and trust, as well as honest and open communication. That's a lot of things. And also, for me, I truly believe the basis of how reciprocal relationships are possible, what love relationships, and I'm talking love in all capacities of love, romantic, platonic, again, all the things we're going to get into today.
Yeah.
But for me, that is a vital foundation for relationships of all kinds. If our relationships are not able to contain all of those components, I think neutrality is kind of like the step down from that. And then I think for me personally, again, where I'm at in my life, like relationships that don't contain that are either neutral or they don't serve me anymore.
And then therefore maybe those connections change.
They change. And, you know, relationships change constantly through our lives.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For a lot of different reasons.
Yes.
So true. Yeah. I mean, I like the bell hooks definition that you just went over. And I think like it is interesting to think about the 7 components in relation to like those neutral people or those neutral level connections, because they probably still include some of these, but maybe like for you and how you're living currently, and maybe how I'd even choose to live would be that my like intimate relationships have most, if not all of these, most of the time, if not all of the time.
Totally.
I mean, you know, we can't probably go strive for 100%, but like, right. And so neutral would probably still include some of these a lot of the time, but maybe not all. So I like that. It's a nice little rubric maybe for our listeners and for ourselves.
Yeah. And thinking of love as it says here, love is an act of will, both an intention and an action. So thinking of love as a verb, like how are we showing up in all of these ways in action with the people that we care about, with the relationships that we have in our lives?
Totally.
For me as a parent, how am I living that action of love as a parent in all of those ways? You know, I do strive for as much as humanly possible, you know.
Yeah.
But again, because we're talking about all types of relationships today, I think we are going to center romantic relationships a little bit, and also like what we would call poly-intimate relationships, which we will dive into. So do you want to, where do you want to start, Erin? Now that we've already started.
Where should we go next?
I
don't know. This is a really big topic. Yeah. And I think centering maybe, like we've talked about what the ideal is, what the not ideal is, the various styles. I don't know. I think we have queer relationships on here too. Like, I think that's a really nice, I think thinking about queer relationships, even like going into that, like if we're talking about the different types of connections, styles, like love levels, whatever. I mean, queer relationships, I think queer people do this really well. Like, we are already quote unquote non-conforming. Just in any queer identity, at least at one point, was a marginalized population, now a targeted population, continued. But I think queer dynamics, queer people loving queer people non-romantically or romantically, has always included, I would say, an aspect of like building that chosen family, having community, doing relationship, like there's more freedom to do like we don't have the same pressure, or we've unlearned the conditioning of like following the relationship milestones. So already we're doing things differently. We're moving in sooner, or not getting married because we're not allowed to, or choosing to get married once it's allowed, and then making families in different ways and having all sorts of different dynamics there, or even having multiple, like, right, there's all sorts of ways that I think queer relationships are a nice kind of beacon of how connections and the depths of them can look different, even if you're not romantically involved with someone.
Absolutely. Which I think kind of ties into what we were talking about last time, which is when we are able to kind of release repression from our lives, heal through repression. And again, for those of you who haven't listened, that's like so much of the societal conditioning that we are kind of put under growing up in this society of conformity and of doing things a certain way. I think even just accepting queerness is like step number one of accepting that we can be nonconformist in relationships, and that relationships can look so many different ways. I mean, again, as somebody who I created a heteronormative nuclear family for myself, and it did not work for me. It didn't work for my family. Everyone in my family is so much happier now that we are not a nuclear family.
Yeah.
My kid has so much love in their life because not only do I have like a romantic partner, I have an aromantic life partner. I have a poly-intimate community. Yeah. They all love my kids so much. And it's like, so cool. It is so beautiful to just be like, this is what
the village,
this is what it can be. Yeah. This is what the village can look like outside of, what it used to be, which was people living in smaller, like actual physical communities together. Now we're all so spread out and like living in late stage capitalism. People are busy, like people have lots of things going on, but also there's like so many different ways and what feel like newer ways to explore how we like live and connect with people in ways that, feed us and just let us know we're not alone, And if you haven't found that yet,
it's out there.
It's out there, and also it can feel so daunting to be like, well, I remember my aromantic life partner and I a couple of years ago were like, God, we just feel so fucking alone.
Yeah.
Where are our people? Like, this was also still kind of like, COVID times.
Totally.
Just being like, why does it feel like no one is out there ready to meet us where we're at? And here we are, fast forward 2 years later, we've created that for ourselves, for sure. But there will be moments of there have been for me at least, like moments of such despair. And that's even after I was divorced and that was a whole other level of relationship dynamics,
Sure.
But in like a queer, more like, how can I do relationship differently perspective, it's still having moments of being like, how do I find these people,
Yeah. How do you think you found your people?
Oh gosh, I'm going to give a very boring answer. Not really boring, but probably an answer, as an extroverted introvert, I had to put myself out there. I first joined a queer co-working space, which again, living in Portland, I think I was lucky to have access to. That's where I met two of the people, like first night I went was where I met two of the people who are now in my poly-intimate community and like two of my closest life people.
Yeah.
And from there, it was just saying yes to things as a single parent, finding what that balance felt like of like putting myself in queer spaces and just, let's talk about vulnerability. Like intimacy for me and reciprocal relationships in general is cultivated through the ability to be genuinely and authentically vulnerable with people. And I think I was also very intentional about the kinds of relationships that I needed in my life. I wanted people who could meet me where I was at, who could sit in messy emotions with me, who could understand that I am a parent and sometimes, need support, and also sometimes need to be distracted. And also sometimes I just have different needs. My schedule fluxes. And now I have people in my life who prioritize like meeting me where I'm at, and vice versa. I meet them where they're at as well.
Yeah.
But the starting place for that was like, I was very lucky. I had two people who kind of like they stuck with me through everything.
Yeah.
So I did have those people. Great. But from there, it was really just about like, who are the kinds of folks that I want to be around? And I just kept putting myself in those spaces. And then here I am 2 years later with like 7 folks, even more than that. But in my in my poly-intimate community, there's 7 of us.
It's interesting to hear all the, like, here's how many people, here's how I did it. And I'm just like reflecting on my own experiences with, within friendship and community and connections that I have. And yeah, I don't like, I think that I don't maybe need as very many people. I don't know, or at least in this phase of life, like, right, that can ebb and flow. So maybe it's important for listeners to hear that too, right? Like your community can be, this is yours, and this is a great example. And as I think we've said at least a couple times already in past episodes that, right, like these are just two perspectives that we're giving.
Yep.
But I've definitely increased like my bar of expectations for what my like what types of relationships I want to keep close in my life. And I also noticed that I pretty significantly can ebb and flow in how many connections I need depending on who's there and what they're giving me. But it does seem to be pretty low as far as like that goes. But yeah, no, it's just, I don't know. It's just interesting to reflect on. I'm glad you found your community.
Yeah, I mean, I'm still finding, you know,
Totally.
my romantic partner came in later in the game, I guess. And even from that relationship and like our connection, you know, things are still expanding and still
always
in flow always. And it's really beautiful just to kind of like witness and to be a part of.
Yeah.
I think one of the foundational aspects that my romantic partner introduced to me was relationship anarchy, which for those of you who don't know, there's like, it's a framework of, instead of assigning heteronormative or more like societally typical aspects to relationships, it's really more of an individual way to look at each connection and relationship and what components serve that individual connection. So you can, there's like, I think it's called the relationship anarchy smorgasbord. Is that what it's called?
Is this a book?
No, it's like a poster or like a
menu,
a diagram, kind of like a menu. Exactly. And my
so
partner
funny.
and I actually did that when, like, a few weeks into dating, they sent it to me and they were like, which of these do you want to apply to us, at least right now? And it can always change. And so we went through together and we were like, you know, this, and this. And I've since done it with multiple other people in my life. And it's like, do we share resources? Do we share physical touch? Do we share sexual touch? It's just a beautiful and brilliantly expansive way to, and I don't know who created it, and that is something I will have to search to give credit for. But it's been so beautiful to just be like, in every connection that is valuable to me, I get value from all of these people in such different ways. And I think that's another way that kind of like applying a queer mindset to relationship is like, we can't and don't need to have every one of our needs met by one person or by two people. And
or I think to with this smorgasbord, like, or assuming we're not also walking in assuming.
For sure. There are less assumptive aspects, I think, to queer relationships, and just like through a queer mindset of, what is this relationship? What does it mean to me? What are the aspects of it? And how does it bring value to my life? And also, again, I think from the way that I'm living right now, because there are no prescriptive elements, it's like, I'm not following the track of like, well, we've been dating for this long, so like maybe it's time to get engaged and get married or move in together or whatever. Like, it's just being in relationship, which is being in practice.
I bet this feels, to some of our listeners, I could imagine, uncomfortable. And I think probably, maybe even in the last episode, definitely I know in future episodes and topics, that this being thing, like our name implies, doing things differently implies, it is an act of letting go a bit. And that is vulnerable, and it does feel risky, and there isn't a plan, and there isn't a set schedule, and there's not rules. That's like something I always say. There's no rules. I say that to my clients constantly.
Except like
about
ethics.
Everything. Except for ethics.
Yeah.
But as far as like relationship milestone plans or how connections have to be, there aren't rules. Yes, of course, like, don't harm yourself, don't harm others. I would say that's probably the only rule there are, or at least what all the other ethical rules are based off of. But other than that, like, yeah, it's kind of a free-for-all, and we're just, our brains like patterns, our brains like predictability. And so the things that were sold from a young age and conditioning of, you know, you're gonna get married to Prince Charming, but first you'll like move in and all, I don't know, like depends on if you came from religion or not, but there is like a very set of like things you do and don't do in relationships. And the romantic relationship is often also put on a pedestal. So
absolutely
this whole, what we're talking about, relationship anarchy, that's a really strong word. I remember the first time I heard the phrase relationship anarchy, and I was like, a little bit like the word anarchy is a little hard
it's a little
to
heavy.
Swallow. It just seems out there.
It's radical.
Yeah, it is. And so I don't know, I guess I want to just put out there for our listeners that like it is uncomfortable. It is an uncomfortable, especially if you've never even thought of this or broached the subject, I'm living like this way because that's just what I don't know where any of you all are at. It is uncomfy, and I think that's what we strive for here in our lives, in this podcast. We want to bring the uncomfortable things up because ultimately, like this uncomfortable thing that we're talking about, doing relationships differently, I think we're talking about it because it feels so much better than it ever did when maybe you were prescribing to what you were supposed to be doing.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's like through examination, through learning how to decondition, which is a many layered process, through learning nervous system regulation, self-regulation, co-regulation, building relationships from those places, then we can be free to make actual decisions that are in alignment with who we actually are. And that is hard work. It's scary. It is constant. So, yeah.
We're right on track here.
Is putting ourselves outside of societal heteronormative patriarchal construct is othering. It's like we have to choose to other ourselves by being queer. I mean, not everyone listening to us is queer, but if you're even interested in doing relationships in more reciprocal, more like outside of conditioning ways, it's a big navigation that brings up a lot of grief and also brings up so much joy.
It's messy.
It's possible. It's all of the things.
Yeah, I'm just thinking how much this it just relates so much to the authenticity episode and authenticity in general. Like, because it feels, just another layer of of that deconditioning, of healing from repression. I would argue that if you're following, or if you've been following or ever followed like conditioned, you felt like you just were falling in line to like check the boxes of like your life within relationships. So romantic, this is what happens, and then we move in and we, all that stuff.
And people are like relegated to boxes. These are my friends. Yes. This is my partner.
All of that.
This is my family.
So if you're doing that, if you've done that, that is just another form of repression. If you've never examined it, at least, right? Like, I'm not saying people, and I don't think either of us are saying people can't choose heteronormative, monogamous, follow the, if you followed that path, it's not bad, it's not wrong.
Right.
And examining it could be worth it to ensure that, that if there is an edge there that feels uncomfy, or you're not fully happy or fulfilled or at peace with your life or your life choices, then that could be worth examining.
Then there are other ways. My ADHD brain is going a million miles a minute.
But it's also okay if you're in a heterosexual, married with kids, owning a house relationship.
Even the way that, like, I am sexually monogamous, which is, I think, to some people in poly and in ethical non-monogamy or just non-monogamous like mindsets, is like limiting, but it's what works for me, So I think that there are so many ways to make choices that might even quote unquote seem more conventional, but if they're right for you, they're right for you. Some people, and I know some people who genuinely thrive in like a nuclear family with children.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Some people not so much.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think again it really all goes back to how we know ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
and if our relationships are genuinely reflective of a more healed, more regulated, more value aligned version of ourselves. And that can also bring up that, like, if not, the examination process and the changing process of that, like, could bring loss in.
Mm-hmm.
It could bring, I mean, for me, it was like divorce. It brought in so much life change that I didn't necessarily anticipate. Also, something I know you've experienced.
Mm-hmm.
And that can be scary for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So again, I think it goes back kind of like we said at the beginning, it's such a personal journey and exploration, and we've just got to
Mm-hmm.
figure out what works for us,
I do think, I do think it's true that in general, blanket statement, but I do think it's true authenticity in connections, authenticity to self, whatever the authenticity is related to, comes at there is a cost, but the cost is typically, there's also a benefit, right? It's a cost benefit analysis almost, using some financial terms, but
Yeah.
There is a cost. So it is, like you're saying, the grief, the discomfort, the major life changes. I mean, I've known so many people that have come out, not just you, so many people in my circle that have come out later in life from being married to men who are women. Like my friends are the women in the partnership, and then making a choice to change the family dynamic, leaving their partners to pursue queer relationships. And so far it seems like it all actually works out really for mostly the benefit. Like you said, like your family dynamic now, everyone's happier. And
my ex-husband is happily repartnered, and it's like we've all kind of found what we just didn't have together. And I think it also takes like a massive amount of bravery to even just start
questioning
any of this, which I think, as a coach and as a therapist, I know we see so many people come in being like, here I am. I don't know why this, but like, how do I take steps to just grow in self-discovery? And I think this is like relationships. We have relationships with everyone in our lives, and we have relationships with everything. We've got relationship to the earth. We've got relationships to money. We've got so much of this we will be talking about in our, in this season, and then in future seasons that we've planned. But like, relationships are at the crux of connection. Connection is at the crux of existence. Like, we're boiling it down here to how we relate to ourselves and others is how we move through the world. And we were also talking about blowing open this concept that I think so many of us in like quote unquote spiritual spaces or whatever have seen, that's like, you can't love others until you love yourself.
Yeah.
And definitely. A, false. B, we heal. I mean, there's a level of self-responsibility and self-accountability to our own healing.
Of course.
We've got to learn how to know and love ourselves.
Definitely.
Absolutely. Which, like, if you're struggling with even that, like working with a therapist or a coach is like a great place to start if that's accessible to you. And also, we are reflected, us as humans are reflected back to us through the people that we are in relationship with, through the patterns that show up in relationships. And we are not only, but a huge part of healing those patterns and healing the ways we show up in relationships is by being in relationship with people and different types of relationships and testing what works and, feeling like, do I feel safe in this connection? Do I feel fulfilled in this connection? Do I feel joy in this connection? Do I feel reciprocity? Like, and then hitting for me, again, speaking only from my experience, but hitting roadblock after roadblock of being like, this feels sticky and messy. And do I eject, or do I stay in this really uncomfortable place in this relationship, actually be intimate, actually be vulnerable, and figure out what this is bringing up for me that feels so messy and hard.
Mm-hmm.
And that has paid off every single time.
And my guess is by payoff, you mean multiple things. And that, and I would guess, because as a, I work with couples, I have my own experiences, but that either you're going to be met with what you need through your vulnerability, asking for what you need, leaning into the messy, the uncomfortable, or you're going to get valuable information from that person that they can't meet you there with what you need as you're requesting it and being vulnerable and getting uncomfy. And that is valuable information for you to, either continue to practice vulnerability and see if they can meet you. And if not, after however many chances we decide we want to give someone, they're not maybe for us in this type of connection.
Yep.
And this is something I work with couples on. The couples I do see a lot is we're working on restarting, building new habits, whatever it is. And sometimes the couples, they can meet each other and show up in the vulnerable, hard stuff, but sometimes they can't. And it pays off, because do we really want to be in connection with someone that can't meet our needs consistently, right? In a pattern consistent way? No is the answer. Like, there is one answer. Like, maybe we're not all ready to say no, but if we aren't getting our needs met, that is like, it hurts my heart, right?
Having chronically unmet needs is a trauma response. Having chronically unmet needs leads to, or is a form of self-abandonment.
Definitely.
And leads to resentment, pain, internalized stuff. Again, for me, led to depression, because I was holding in so much. So, not easy things to think about, not easy things to process, especially if we're already in long-term relationships with friends, with partners, with people.
Definitely.
Asking these questions it's a scramble. It can change things very quickly.
Which is why we recommend
working with people.
If you don't have the connections, the type of like reciprocal connections we're talking about just in your, average, in your community, in your group of friends, family, whatever, pay someone or use your insurance to pay someone to have that type of connection, because we do need help in this sort of thing, being uncomfortable, whatever it is, like making those changes so hard.
And we are both divorced people, and I also, it is the hardest thing I've ever been through, especially with a young child. Not something I would say do everybody, but also we had a therapist for years before we made the choice to separate. We had a therapist guide us through our separation and our divorce. We've both had individual therapists through the whole process, and we were lucky enough to have that access. But it has ultimately, like, we were going by the guidelines of like child psychology, child, mental development, doing everything, like checking all the boxes of making sure that we were doing it in a way that was like the most supportive for our child. Again, I think something, especially like as a child with divorced parents, like not something I experienced. I don't think it's something that's modeled.
Yeah.
So again, like that is possible. And it was also like the hardest, very expensive, like it was a lot of things to be able to, and I had the privilege of being able to do my divorce that way. So I think like this examination, relationships, as we've said already so many times, like they're going to be so different for everybody, and how we move through them, how we even start aligning into more fulfilling, more reciprocal relationships is going to be so different for every single person. It starts with us, and it also includes everybody around us.
Yeah.
This is big stuff, y'all. We don't talk about little things here.
It makes me, think about like our connection and relationships with family, especially for our queer listeners, like this authenticity thing, this connection thing, like our family of origin, not necessarily the family we create. But I don't know. I think it should just be put out there. Like, that's also like a challenge. I know that's something that I went through with my queer identity and my journey and my continued journey and authenticity of like having, you know, pretty religious, conservatively religious parents, and having a really conflicted experience internally of like, and even still, like, I don't think it's fully figured out of like, how do I connect with them? What is the right connection? Is any connection the right, you know, like I don't have the answer, but I think a lot of people relate to that. Whether your parents are religious or not, like parents can also just be not accepting of queerness for any number of other reasons. And so,
or like life choices in general, married the wrong person, or did the wrong job or whatever,
or getting divorced, whether you're getting divorced because you're queer or not, or like separating your whatever. Like all of those authentic journeyings that can lead, that we maybe, you know, take pause on because of our fear of what it will do to our connection with our parents, is so common. And I don't know, it takes it, you know, it is a process. It's like a delayering, like you said. There isn't like one linear straight like path to that or to the conclusion, if there even ever is a conclusion. But I think these are good, like what we're asking, right? These questions that you've brought up, that we're posing to all of you, are beneficial, and there's not one right thing to do.
There sure isn't. Should we segue a little bit into some of the more outlying relationship dynamics that we experience, like polyintimacy, like non-monogamy, like polyamory?
Sure. Yeah.
Just diving
we should probably
right back on in.
Touch on this is a really broad one today.
It's a broad one. I think we'll have to have another episode on all of these
things. A big topic, and it's good to cover it all.
Yeah.
So you want to talk about non-monogamy, ethical non-monogamy, polyamory?
I think I told Erin before we were recording, I practice polyintimacy, but not polyamory in the way that I think that it's perceived by people as a sexually monogamous person for now. So
and I think I'm poly-minded.
Erin,
I'm coining it.
You heard it here first, everybody.
I've looked. I can't find this word anywhere, but poly-minded versus monogamy-minded. Is what I'm like. I don't know if I'm birthing it. Maybe it exists somewhere else, but I haven't found it yet. So please inform me if you're like, no, this is from there. I would totally love to hear that. But anyway, I'm going to claim it for now. But being right, like I think me and my partner are, I would say right now, actually, we're monogamish. But I do think I want to define monogamy-minded. So I think monogamy-minded versus poly-minded, it's the idea of what we've been talking about today. Poly-minded is an experience that I feel like I am, of where all connections, right? The idea that like my romantic partner, the person I'm having sexual connection with, is in a different, like, right, these groupings like you were talking about. Here's my sexual partner, my life partner, and here's my friends, and here's like my family of origin, and here's like my family that I have with my kids. Like, it's just a lot of like,
there's a lot of compartmentalizing,
yes,
in the way that we are societally taught to have relationship with people.
But in my mind, because I have friends and a partner and siblings and, you know, all these people in my life that I am connected to because I have any sort of relationship with them, that I am polyamorous, or I am keeping my mind open to like the idea that all these connections are just as important. And maybe that's a little bit like relationship anarchy, I don't know, but I do think it has more to do with loosening my mind up and getting myself a little bit more into the gray, that like every connection is a valuable connection, whether I'm having sex with the person or not. And so monogamy minded, I think I have been that, where it's, well, this person matters more, and these other connections are so different from this one. And that's just, I've come to realize for myself, at least, that is just not true. These are all very important connections to my well-being and thriving, and that I value them just as much, at least my intimate ones, as my intimate, like, sexual partner. Also, I'm monogamous right now. Just, we're exploring things. But
yeah.
Anyway. But I'm poly-minded, and I love the word.
Yes. And I mean,
I think it's similar to polyintimacy, right?
Polyintimacy, again, not sure if this exists, but my friends and I, my polyintimate community and I like created it. It's so funny because I think in English, we don't have great words for people. Like there's either partner or friend or like lover or like whatever.
Yeah.
But I have a group of people that I like love. And they're more, I mean, they are chosen family, but also we're like flirty and we like hold hands and we're like cute and snuggly and we dance together. And like, I don't have sexual touch with them, but we've got like love for each other. So I'm like, I call them my friends. Commitment, totally. Yeah. But I'm like, what are you really? Like, there aren't really great ways to describe these things yet. It's starting. One of my favorite resources for this is Casey Tanner. They are at Queer Sex Therapy on Instagram. They talk so much about all of this. Even if you're not queer, highly recommend checking them out. They're like a non-binary queer sex therapist, but talk so much about like the different ways that we can be in relationship, and also how up until this point, like the ways that we can even talk about different relationships is so limited in the English language. So go check them out. And also, like polyintimacy for me has become so much more than friendship. It is about honoring and valuing my connections with people in the ways that they actually are. My romantic partner and I were just talking about this a few days ago. Like, we both have given ourselves the permission to connect with people with our hearts, not like in ways we think we should because we're in a romantic partnership. Yeah. When I like meet somebody, like even you, when we met, there was like a heart connection with us. Definitely. And if I had closed off to that, because I was like, I know, like we're so cute. But if I had closed off to that, even in any way, because I was there with my romantic partner, we probably wouldn't be here today. But it's like having heart-led relationships with people is what polyintimacy is for me.
I love it. And I think that's what I equate to my poly-minded phrase, because this is something that me and my partner, my romantic partner,
we're like, there's no words for these things.
Well, we've talked a lot about our commitment to our relationship, to the relationship that we have. And this is something fairly new for me, but like I am prioritizing now finally, like the relationship, at least in this connection, but I think in all my connections, I'm now not putting on a pedestal, but like caring so much for the relationship that I'm putting aside any momentary discomfort of like having a need, being vulnerable, sharing openly, communicating openly. And it's so cool to see because like our connections here, not because I was maybe poly-minded, I guess that's why our connection's here, but I think it's about being able to like connect with whoever on almost any level, not sexual with my current situation, which is fine, but being able to do that. And that if that for some reason was an issue, or like, let's say we did have like a certain rule, like maybe I do want to have sex with someone else at some point. I'm not saying that now, but we've even talked about that. Like as long as me not being able to do that, or her not being able to do that, or whatever, like in our agreements currently, doesn't cause resentment, which is the long-term relationship killer, then we're good. But we need to be able to have the uncomfortable conversation. Yes. I want to have sex with this person, or whatever is in, outside of what we already have agreed upon.
Because discomfort, and I want to talk about the jealousy thing too, and I know we're kind of running short on time now, but I think for me, I was so terrified of jealousy in a relationship with a person who, when we started dating, was in another relationship also. And, we chose a couple of months into our romantic connection to become sexually monogamous. But I was so afraid of the jealousy. And it wasn't because I was afraid of the jealousy. It was because I was afraid of the discomfort to have that conversation with someone that I loved.
Interesting.
And I think that, for me, it can boil down to like that fear of the what if in almost any relationship, and any kind of like uncomfortable way that we would need to have a conversation that's centered from genuine, authentic like need or questioning of things.
Yeah.
because there is always the chance that it won't go well, or that it won't go the way that we quote unquote expect or anticipate or want it to. And it could change things for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But part of being in authentic relationship with people is being able to say, here's how I'm feeling. Here's what it's bringing up for me. Let's hold this conversation together. Let's move through that in the ways that we can with the tools that we have at the time. And where does that leave us? And it might take you in different directions. My partner and I have been very honest about that with each other. We've
Definitely.
already circled back so many different times, choosing to come back together. And also are still very aware that, like, at any given time, us loving each other means that we are willing to support each other on paths, even if it means that our paths diverge.
Yeah, I would say
that is ditto. Love.
Oh, it is.
And
it's beautiful.
That's another part of, like, the bell hooks definition of love is supporting people with the intention of supporting that individual's spiritual expansion, existential expansion. To love someone in that way means that you have to be willing to lose them.
I would agree. Well, and I think that's what, I mean, yeah, bell hooks components are great, but I think that is what reciprocal relationships, what deep true love is I put it differently with my partner, but it's like I want her happiness, and not like the fleeting kind, but like I want her like deep happiness over anything else. And so I said that to her this weekend. Like, yeah, we were having a discussion about like our current like relationship agreements, and they just changed again. We've changed like 3 times, which I love. That's great. Like, we're checking in regularly. It's beautiful. But I'm like, if you want someone else, if you need to move out of the, like, I don't know what it's going to be or what if there's going to be anything, but that's higher than like what I want for myself or my desire for her.
And I think it's like, I'm like emotional because this has been so prevalent in my own personal journey right now, but it's like, to love ourselves is to put ourselves first, but to love another person is to both be able to prioritize and center ourselves while holding someone else in their own highest self becoming.
Yeah. It's so cool.
Which is like so a lot.
It's so cool. I think I'm just so excited to be doing it right. I mean, right's a strong word, but it feels like the healthiest thing I've ever done in a romantic connection, sexual connection, whatever, that it's so exciting to me. The risk is like feeling fun.
It is so exciting, but it's like, for me, a Cancer, son who is like deeply, and I'm healing this again, I think actively in relationship with people, healing an abandonment wound, like a deep abandonment wound. The fear of being left is still so heavy for me to hold, I think, especially with a child.
Oh yeah.
Because you're also leaving that kid,
Definitely.
But it's like a risk I have to be willing to take to have the quality of relationships that I know that I deserve in my life.
I'm so happy
it's
for
so
you.
Emotional.
Yeah, it is. The abandonment wound is a hard one. I don't know how it happened, but I do feel like I've gotten, I don't know, you can never say complete, but the hump over the hump for sure.
I think so too. I mean, I think healing my codependency was like a huge
big one.
Which was like a years-long journey, but I think I can successfully say I have healed codependency in my life, which is not something I ever thought I would be able to say.
That's so cool.
That's a whole other episode we'll have.
Yeah.
But I think it's like, after that, then all of these other things came up to the surface that were like, well, that still hurts.
Yeah, definitely.
That's still something I got to work on.
Right, the layers. We're coming back to the layers.
We're coming back to being in practice, as we do.
Every time. It's all about being, it's never complete.
I need to go cry now.
In
a good way.
We didn't really get into all the types of different relationships, but I think what the spirit of what we're saying, what we just discussed, is that there are lots of ways to do a relationship, any connection of any kind, and that to discover what you want that to be with any certain person requires authenticity and communication, and then this type of love we're discussing. And that you can do anything you want, whether there's a word for it or not, whether there's you like ethical non-monogamy or polyamory or poly-minded or
relationship
polyintimacy
anarchy
or relationship anarchy. You can label it, you cannot, but you can kind of just do, again, whatever you want as long as you're not hurting yourself or others intentionally.
And get support if you need it. If you feel like this feels out of your scope of current tools that feel possible for you, that's why people like Erin and I exist, because we are trained to ethically support folks in asking these very questions and in creating the follow through in our lives that actually help us be able to then reflect our own value alignment, to be able to call in and center the types of relationships that we learn that we deserve in our lives.
Yeah.
As messy and multidimensional.
Oh, Dani's always looping it back.
As it can be. Woof.
I do love working with people on this.
Same.
If you want, as usual, as always, forever and definitely, if you're interested in working with Dani or I on any of this, I can only work with you if you're in the state of Oregon, but Dani's...
I can work with you as long as you have an internet connection.
Yeah, I'm virtual, so also Oregon, anywhere in Oregon works for me. But anyway, we will also have, I think we're concluding our episode, so as long as we're talking about where you can get help, we're also going to have, as usual, again, resources. I know I'm going to put a couple books on there about different styles of relationships. We'll probably put the bell hooks one on there.
Yeah.
But if you liked what we talked about today, you're interested in where the hell we're getting all these ideas, we'll have some resources as well.
Yeah. And we always continue these conversations on our Instagram at Being in Practice Podcast. So join us over there if you want to get up close and personal with Erin and I. We're pretty funny over there. I'm not gonna lie.
Oh my gosh, it's a lot. Less tears.
If you need like a lighthearted version of Erin and I, join us on our Instagram and
find the bloopers there.
Yeah, find the blooper reels.
Yeah.
We can't wait to talk to you all soon. We will be back with our next episode, which, y'all, is about money.
Yeah, we got our guest, Melissa Dorman. I'm excited. In true queer fashion, she's my ex, but she's also very money smart. So.
Yeah, so this will be a beautiful conversation about money, which is also a relationship, because we've all got a relationship to money, y'all. Okay.
Again, it just ripples perfectly. It's
the
crazy.
sporadic nature of existence is the sporadic nature of existence.
Is this the Fibonacci sequence
and
again?
On that note, we will leave you all. Thank you all for being with us.
Yes, thank you.
We'll talk to you next time.
All right.
Goodbye. Bye.